Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for coming to this session here at the 2018 Global Media Forum. How can sustainable sourcing tackle inequalities? It's a riveting subject, and I'm sure that everybody else who couldn't make it here is watching the live stream wherever they are right now, so they had better be. I'd like to welcome on the stage our two speakers today. We've got two very interesting speakers with us today. Niels Angel, he's the head of sustainability in the supply chain. If you'd like to come on the stage and say hello and wave to the masses out there. You know, head of sustainability in the supply chain at the BMW Group. So we're going to hear some interesting stuff from about what BMW has been doing in this area over the last couple of years. We've also got Friedel Hutz-Adams, who's a senior researcher at Germany's Südwind Institute, which is an NGO here. And oh, there you go. Don't fall off the stage. And a lot of their work is into sort of human rights and fair economy practices in industry and that sort of thing. So we're going to hear from both of these wonderful people in just a moment. But to begin with, Friedel and I are going to leave the stage again, and Niels is going to, as I say, tell us a little bit about the things that the BMW Group has been up to in the area of sustainable sourcing and the like over the last couple of years. So over to you, Niels.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon from me. I can just start straight away. If you see the presentation, I hope you see it all. Every BMW presentation about sustainability starts with the I3, so mine as well. When we launched it in 2013, it was pitched as being modern, urban, electric, high-tech, but also sustainable. So we had, in the product communication, we wanted to talk a lot about how sustainable it is. And one of the topics there was we made natural fiber in the interior, want to use less plastics and use natural fiber. Natural fiber being sustainable, we thought. So the interior, a lot of parts are made out of kenaf, which is a plant which looks a bit like cannabis, but is actually harmless. And you make fibers out of it, which you can use instead of plastic. So we thought that is a good thing to talk about, and it fits the communication for the car very well. And then also in 2013, as you all know, Rana Plaza happened, and suddenly everybody was talking about what's happening in the supply chain of big companies in Europe. And we also then looked at our supply chain, and then we suddenly realized that the kenaf, which we actually bought from a supplier in Landshut in Bavaria, the parts actually in the end come from Bangladesh. And if you see in the middle how it's made and how it's processed, it doesn't look so urban and modern and sustainable anymore suddenly. And we also kind of realized that we have farmers there in precarious conditions, kind of working on supplying us with these fibers. So we kind of discussed what to do about that, and we said, we are not going to kind of take that out of the car and replace it with plastics again, but we want to kind of do something for the farmers on the ground and work with them to improve their conditions, and being able to talk about this natural fiber again in kind of positive terms. So we set up a project. We looked for partners there. I think that's also very important that we don't go things like that alone. You can see the partners here. Strexelmeier was actually the supplier. So the first-tier supplier we bought the stuff from, they decided to work with us, but also having a development agency, because BMW is not a development agency. It is a car company. We have no expertise how to work with people on the ground in countries like Bangladesh or in Africa somewhere, although we supply a lot of raw materials from them. So we had the GIZ as a kind of the German development agency doing a study there on the ground for us, kind of first kind of collecting information. What is the problem? That was the first step. And then also deciding, we set up a kind of scheme to help the farmers to improve their conditions. And we had two two big parts, and that is something we want to take from that project and in other projects. That is kind of working on the ground with training schemes, kind of helping them to be more productive, to train them, to coach them. And also the second one is to be more transparent how the supply chain works, because these farmers, there may be 7 or 8 or 10 steps in between us and the farmers on the ground. But car companies or big Western companies with big brands are in the spotlight for problems, although they can't really see them. So we need to understand what the supply chain looks like for these products. So we introduced the traceability system. I think that, as you all know, that is the key, that you know where your stuff comes from in every step. And we also kind of, when I come to the result of the project, we noticed that there are a lot of steps in the supply chain which don't really add value to it as well. So we had a training scheme for actually not only for the farmers, but also for the exporters and the dealers. As well, we kind of tried to take on some kind of professional expertise from NGOs, kind of engage with NGOs on the ground who know how to work with the people on the ground, how to approach them, how to gain their trust, who have worked there on the ground, and also with companies to develop certification standards for agricultural products, because there is always some best practice somewhere which you can rely on, hopefully. And so the idea of this one was not only to make a project, but also engage with other NGOs and stakeholders and getting advice from them. So the final goal was to actually increase the income situation of the farmers on the ground. And since I work in purchasing, also preferably without us paying a lot more for that. So what was the result of the project? The most striking one was that the quality kind of improved a lot, because if you process these fibers, these plants, the quality depends a lot on how you process them in the first step, what the farmers do with them, if they water them properly, if they clean them properly. And when we started the project, we were told that the quality A, which we need in the parts you can see, is maximum 10%. And at the end of the project was 77%. So since we pay more for better quality, that also improved the income of the farmers. We also increased the yield, not by that much, but it has a lot to do with where they get their seeds from, the farmers. We didn't know that is a big problem, but actually seeds are bought by them, by professional seed companies, and if you they come from India, actually, in Bangladesh most of the times. And the farmers know that sometimes they get bad seeds but have no leverage for in that supply chain, but a big company like us or a development agency, they can influence that supply chain a lot more. So we gave them better seeds, basically. Also tried to teach them how to grow their own seeds. That added 10% in yields. That also led to, obviously, because if farmers get more money, led to an increase in the cultivated area of KNAF. And on that, I probably have to mention that we also picked KNAF because it's grown in the off-season. Basically, it doesn't compete with foodstuff you grow. That is also an important rule we have, that we only want to use natural fiber, natural products, which doesn't compete with growing food. So, but the cultivated area increased, and also the revenue they actually got increased because we cut out some of the supply chain, because there's a lot of money in that supply chain, actually, I think. And in most supply chains, there's a lot of money kind of going around, but it doesn't always end up with the people on the ground actually making the stuff, but it's lost in a lot of steps in between. So that actually the project led to a significant increase in the income of the farmers, and we hope that the project is finished now. And we had an after study that a lot of the results there can carry on and can also be used maybe in the growing of other crops on the ground. So that's actually a fairly small product for us, KNAF, but we gained a lot of experience in kind of working on the ground there in Bangladesh. And that is important now. If you look at the next picture, the next step in the car industry will be the move to electric cars. That will, I think, the future, at least in premium mobility. So that you can drive into cities. It is very clean. It is modern. It's also a bit sporty. It has a very good image, and there will be a lot of electric cars coming out in the car industry, not only for BMW but also for all the other premium car manufacturers. You can see that in the news if you look at car magazines. But the problem is that batteries are not without problems, as probably most of you know. We have minerals in there, and we need a lot of them, and they have problems in mining and in actually getting these minerals. And the biggest one is actually cobalt. A lithium battery could also be called a cobalt battery. I think in a big car battery there's about 8 to 10 kilograms of cobalt. That is actually a lot. In a mobile phone there's only maybe 1 teaspoon of it. And the problem with cobalt is that it's about 80%, 70 to 80% of it is actually mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That has to do with that there's actually a lot of stuff there of it. And Congo is a very difficult country. People are very poor. Political situation is not so good. There's not many income opportunities for people there. So we are sourcing a very important mineral for us from a very problematic region, basically, in the world. And there are two ways of getting of mining cobalt in the world and also in DRC. One is large scale, it's big machines. You've got a kind of fenced off area. We actually like that as an industrial company. You can audit that. You can make sure that there are no children, that there are no accidents happening. It's also usually done with lots of expatriates coming in from different countries, working there on the mine site for a few months, going home again. I've seen a few mines that actually had a golf course on it and things like that. So it's not much the local population gains from that. I mean, a few people work in these mines, but since they use a lot of machines and things, the people living in the area, they don't get much from this kind of boom, which is at the moment in cobalt mining. So therefore, a lot of people engage in activities which are called artisanal and small-scale mining. And you see a picture there. I don't know if you can see it. There's actually a guy climbing in a hole he dug. That is a legal activity in Congo. The Congolese government legalized that so that people can actually earn money from the stuff on the ground, in the ground. And they dig holes in the ground, which are, I think the legal limit is 30 meters, and then they go kind of vertical there, and it's very dangerous. But people actually earn a decent amount of money with that. Maybe you cannot imagine it, but they earn $100 a week, $150 a week. It's very hard work. It's very dangerous. But there are not many more opportunities in Congo. A lot of people are actually moving there. It's like I imagine the gold rush in America. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, that's happening there now. So somebody digs a hole and finds cobalt, and there are 1,000 people this week, and next week there are 50,000. That's what the governor said to me. And they live in kind of tents provided by United Nations. So about 10 to 20% of the cobalt mined in DRC comes from these mines. And the question is, what do you do with them? There might be children on it, there are accidents happening. So the first instinct is to take that out of your supply chain. We don't want to have that. There are companies, we say our cobalt is 100% ASM free. We don't use this kind of labor. But the problem is, if that happens, and probably the cobalt supply could be safeguarded just by using LSM, large-scale mining, but the people will be unemployed, they will have nothing to do. So we decided that we don't want to do that we want to take out the unregulated ASM mining out of our supply chain, but also set up a scheme where we can improve the conditions to start with one mine, in a model mine, and take some of the experience we had from the KINAF project into that project and kind of set up a kind of project where we can improve the working conditions of the ASM miners. And so that is planned at the moment. We had a kind of study done as well, again, and we also had a preliminary mission on the ground. I actually went there in January, had a look what the situation really is. But so it's not really, we haven't signed it, but we plan to do that, and kind of to see if it's possible to have a kind of model ASM mine where there are no children working on it, where there are not many accidents happening, where we can have safety measures, where we can equip people with safety gear, and also again help them to understand better what the economics are in the industry, because the cobalt price went from about $20,000 a ton to $140,000 a ton in the last 2 years. And I think not much of that is actually arriving with the miners on the ground. So there's a lot of money in that supply chain, and we need to understand why it doesn't end up with the people there on the ground. So you can see how I've got a picture there. You can see how the pricing is made. Somebody writes that on the kind of basically on one of the sacks, the bags they use to transport the cobalt, and it's a kind of it's like selling potatoes. Basically, they sell stones on the market. So that's what we plan there. We also have then a different scheme where we try to offer training on other activities, farming, for example. Most of the foodstuff in Congo is actually imported from Zambia, although you could grow it there, and not many people do and know how to do it. So there might be also a way of, in the medium term, moving people into other employment, training them as car mechanics, builders, things like that. So that is the second pillar of that project, but we also want to, in the future, buy cobalt from, or plan to buy cobalt from model mine, which is hopefully a lot better than what we see today down the ground. And then, and that is, I think, also important, it will be only a small project because we are the smallest car company actually in the world. But we are actively engaged in various organizations which try to actually improve the conditions of cobalt mining in DRC. One is the Responsible Cobalt Initiative. You can see here a lot of big companies. You probably all know Samsung, Apple is there, Dell. But also, and that is important for me, Chinese organizations, Chinese companies, because most cobalt smeltering in Congo is actually done by Chinese companies. So we need to take them on board and kind of work with them to improve the conditions there. And we want to take what we learn in this project and bring it into this organization, and hope that it can be scaled up, and that other companies and organizations take that up. And so that then, in the end, the income and living situations of the people there will improve. Okay, that was it from me.
Thank you. Niels, Anna, thank you very much for that presentation. Frieda, if you'd like to come back onto the stage. Just before we sit down, and it's not about me, but I did make a bit of a mistake at the start. I didn't tell you who I am, and I don't really expect you all to be able to read this here. So I'm Zulfikar Abani, and I'm from DW. I'm a science and technology journalist, and that's enough about me. So I'm going to sit down now, and we're going to have a little chat here. And I was hoping to start off with a bit of a naive question, if I may. To you, Niels. In some of the documentation, it says, you mentioned the number of suppliers you have, or the people in your supply chain. You can't always see everything on the ground. So if you have, if it is like 12,000 suppliers in about 70 different countries, and this is what's necessary. Now, it's a complex supply chain. I wonder whether it is at all possible that, given that we're talking about human rights, fair labor rights, and that sort of thing, how difficult is it really to standardize this across the board? Why is it that it's so difficult to just say, this is how we do business? whether it's we're cultivating kinaf or we are digging for cobalt or other resources. Why can't it be like that across the board?
You mean in all industries?
Well, say we'll take your industry, the car industry.
Okay.
You know.
No, I mean
why can't human rights?
We have that as a kind of standardized approach, and as far as we can see, our first and probably second tier, we have a kind of standardized system where we ask our suppliers what they do, where they have certification, but then at some point you get to a stage where you can't really see where your supply chain is anymore, because it goes very deep down and then moves into different industries, farming, mining, steel making, aluminium making, and the issues are different in a lot of these industries, and also standards are different. So it is then, and in some industries the car industry is not a very big player, so it will be hard to kind of force the steelmaking industry to adopt standards only for the car industry, because most of their volume goes into building industry. So we buy from a lot of different industries, and there are different standards in different industries. So it's not, at least not so easy to have exactly the same standard. But in some areas, for example in mining, we are working on having one standard for mining activities, for example.
Okay. Friedel Hütze-Adams, you obviously listening to that, as we all were, to Niels's presentation. How do you feel about, let's say, start in a more general terms, in the car industry's approaches to sustainable resourcing, but also particularly the BMW's efforts in this area?
Well, I started to challenge the car industry some 7 or 8 years ago with a paper on raw materials for the car industry, and at that time, except BMW, we organized a conference, nobody came. Nobody was really interested in discussing these crucial factors, and one of the challenging things for me is that on the one side, the car industry guarantees quality. They have very strict quality requirements. And on the other side, they say, well, we can guarantee human rights. And often this is linked. When I started my research, I was always told, the car companies, they don't know where the raw material comes from, and the value chain is so long, there are so many steps. And then a friend of mine told me, my brother, he has a company, and he makes from aluminium, he makes motor parts. Ask him. And he told me that for the car industry, he has to guarantee the quality of it for 10, for 12 years. So he buys best quality aluminium from a refinery not far from here. And they even have on their delivery letters that they use the best ore of the world from Guinea. So he was a small company, 40 people. He knew exactly where his raw material come from. But what he also told me is when he made components for other industries, for construction or something, there were trucks coming from Eastern Europe loaded with aluminium. And if he paid cash, they gave him a 20% discount. And he said, I would never do that for the car industry. Because of the quality requirements, and this is what I heard quite often when you talk to your first-tier suppliers. They often have a lot of knowledge, or these who make the cables. They once told me we use only the best copper from Chile. We would never buy spot market stuff which is not clean enough. They try often, and when they have problems, and you have to call back a lot of cars sometimes because they use bad material. But the car industry is in a position, due to their quality requirements, to get a deep impact within their value chain. And this is very interesting for the human rights aspect. There are many small components in the car which are very hard to follow up. But for steel, for copper, for aluminium, and also now for the batteries, for cobalt, you use such big amounts that you need to follow up with the path for quality reasons anyway.
I think what is important is that you actually concentrate on where you can make an impact on the materials which we use a lot, and I think we came a long way on that. I mean, in aluminium and steel, there are initiatives now which are also a member, and also the car industry. Nowadays, they would all come. I was in Paris recently, and the whole car industry was there together with the electronics industry, and the topic was battery raw materials and due diligence and that. So I think the car industry came a long way, but I agree with you that in some areas, or in a lot of areas, we can make an effort and an impact, and we kind of working on that. Yeah.
Friedel, you mentioned length of contracts, and BMW, you've just recently secured some contracts for the next 5 to 10 years that it's been said will guarantee supply, but also sustainable mining. How do long-term contracts guarantee that?
Well, you can, if you know where you get your material from for a long term, you can afford to have a look, and you don't have to look every week or every month how the supply chain works and where the stuff comes from, and then you can work there and audit the sites, kind of go there, have a look, kind of work towards solutions if you see problems, because I think that is also a principle in our first tier management, but also I think deeper down in the supply chain. We have to work with suppliers. We usually don't go there and then switch them if they have problems. We try to change their practices, work with them to improve. And I think if you have a long-term relationship, that actually pays off, because you have the cycle to improve.
I mean, it was mentioned that it's harder to audit a smaller company than it is a larger company. How do you feel about that? Is that the correct way around? I would have thought that a larger company is more exposed, isn't it? So you could see what's happening there. Smaller company, you can have a more personal contact and relationship with the people.
The big brands are more exposed, definitely. I worked for Südwind on different raw materials, and some 10 years ago we made a paper on child labor in the stone industry in India. Now, what do you do with the information that there are a lot of children working? You go to a DIY market and set up a placard there and say, "Don't buy granite from India." Nobody will care. If you attack a brand who sells cars, chocolate, mobile phones, due to the name, due to the image, from an NGO's perspective, it's easier to pressurize them. Yeah. And or an experience on also some 10 years ago, we worked on diamonds. And in Germany, the reaction was nothing, because we have no diamond buying culture, except companies like Bosch and others who make machinery which use blades with diamonds. I sent questionnaires to them. Nobody answered. Not one. Because we knew exactly no NGO will run a campaign against us. Yes, it's too anonymous what we produce. In America, they had a campaign against Tiffany, and Tiffany is now a front runner for a more sustainable value chain, because you buy a wedding ring with a big diamond on it, and when you hear it's from Congo, it financed war. Tiffany has a problem, Bosch has it not. Yeah. So brands, they are more exposed. They are more exposed, but we need a level playing field. And this is why many NGOs, including Südwind, they are not calling for voluntary measures, but for binding human rights obligations within value chains. We have this with UN guiding principles on businesses and human rights since 2012, that companies should look into the whole value chain, that they should report, that there should be remediation processes. So some companies are investing and are acting, and others are not. And now I come back to the long-term contracts. If you are a supplier for a car company and they start to ask you where does your stuff come from, and you invest into changing your supply chain, and they don't have a long-term contract, and they know that next year they compete with other companies, who is the cheapest, do they invest? Is it a business model to invest and to compete yourself out of a market? And this makes it difficult if...
Regarding regulations and laws, I have a kind of ambivalent feeling, because also in my department we work on 3TGs, on conflict minerals in DRC, and there's a lot of regulation in America, and there's kind of regulation coming up in Europe probably about that. There's lots of documentation. I mean, there may be a few grams of gold in every car, but it's a conflict mineral, so we try to document where it comes from. There's a lot of paperwork, and I don't think it changes much on the ground regarding this conflict. So with regulation, I think it can help in some areas to kind of force the ones which basically are free riders on that to come on board. But if it's not done very well, then it's a big problem, because then resources are being spent for things which don't work. So it can help, but it needs to be, for 3TGs, for example, we need to look very hard what it achieved and maybe change the regulation and make it better. And sometimes we forget a bit about regulation. And I would very much like a campaign occasionally, maybe in that direction as well, because we need to work on good regulation.
This is a very important point, because what happened with the so-called Dodd-Frank Act on these conflict materials, they announced we will introduce it on 1st of June as, what was it, 2009 or 2008, I don't remember. And when the Congolese government, we didn't prepare for it, and from one day to the next, it was introduced. And when the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo started with a boycott of all exports, so everything had to stay in the country, and it was a disaster for all small-scale miners. And now they were blaming the regulation. The problem was that for 2 years or 1.5 year time they had to reorganize the sector, they didn't do anything. Which is very typical. Last week we were all surprised by the European law on privacy, including my NGO. We don't know how many letters and newsletter remarks you received, which was announced. It was announced 2 years in advance. But the disaster in Congo was that they didn't start late, they didn't start at all. And this is the problem with the Dodd-Frank Act. What you are doing with the cobalt, and this is why I think this is quite interesting, you are preparing the ground to introduce a regulation, because you're showing what has to be done with your project, hopefully. And you hopefully combine it with proper research on what has to be done and what has an impact and what not. And then the next, hopefully it will be published, because in other sectors companies do something, and if they fail, they don't talk about it.
We actually, because the slide is still there, the RCI has a kind of working group 2, which deals with ASM mining, and we are a member of that and plan to bring in what we learn on the ground into that working group, so to share it with others. That is a explicit goal in that area.
There is a feeling, though, among some people that there is no 100% sustainable way to mine a metal like cobalt. So there's no way to eradicate all the risks to people and to the environment. So in terms of sustainability, what is BMW doing to look at alternatives to cobalt, new batteries that use other materials? This is something that would be very interesting, wouldn't it, surely, in the electric car industry, to be looking at things. As you mentioned yourself, the price of cobalt going through the roof, and you want to keep things cheaper as well, or cost-effective, let's put it that way. Huh?
Yeah, obviously. The battery technology also kind of is not a BMW research activity. I mean, we have some R&D in that, but worldwide, I think everybody tries to reduce material intake in the batteries, make them cheaper, and also make them smaller and lighter for the same capacity. That is the main goal. I don't think, as far as I know and can predict, that there will be batteries without cobalt. But maybe in 10 or 15 years we will see 80% or even more recycling. If the first car batteries come back, because you can actually recycle cobalt out of old batteries very well, because very heavy material, you can kind of smelt that out. And we can see that lots of the cobalt mining companies, also the smelters, invest in recycling facilities at the moment. So at some point, there will be no, or not that much demand for it. And you can just hope that for the people in Congo, that in the meantime they develop some alternatives for them, that it will be a big problem for them because one of their main income sources, as I said, is cobalt mining. And what do people do then? And so there are two sides of that.
Sure, but we have a tradition in other countries, don't we, of closing down industries that are perhaps not so great for the environment, and we try to find other things. So while you're introducing better seeds in Bangladesh, we could also do other things. How do you feel about it? Is that a route to sort of, like, do we have to move faster on getting alternatives to new battery technology?
Well, you asked how sustainable cobalt could be. Sustainability means that the next generation can use as much as something as you do of something. And as cobalt is not renewable, the crucial question is, will we have closed recycling loops one time?
Yep.
We have to work on alternatives. We have to work with cobalt in Congo, which is one of the most difficult countries in the world. And I'm always very reluctant nowadays to talk about successes or failures of certification, because everybody comes up and say, well, Congo failed. Yeah, Congo did, but the country, it has no legal government now since 2 years. Nobody knows when the next elections will be. And you said that they import most of the food stuff in the northern part of the countries, in the northeastern part, very fertile soils and everything. But there's no road. There's just no road to transport food from the north of the country to the mining areas. And the people, they don't go into farming in many areas because they don't know if they will harvest or if the next rebel group will come and steal everything. So this is the environment you are working in. To bring back this to the bigger picture, what you are working on is transparency in your value chain, and this is what the UN guiding principles demand from all companies, what the OECD wants, Congo is very complicated. In other areas, it will be easier, and it will always be the question: what about sustainability? What about human rights? And mining is often complicated.
To be fair, BMW, you've just last year opened up a lot of information to the public on this to encourage transparency. I just want, before we open this up to questions from the floor, which I hope you're all sort of gagging to ask some questions. We've spoken a lot about DRC. What about other countries where there is cobalt? I know that 50% of the world's mass of cobalt is in DRC or thereabouts. But what about other countries where you can get cobalt? Russia, Australia, which also has its sort of, been criticized for its approaches to natural resources. Canada, Cuba, Philippines, etc. PNG even, which has its issues with certain mining practices. What are the experiences there, and what do we have to be aware of?
Depending on the country where it comes from. Russia is a black box concerning mining, specifically environmental issues. I wouldn't expect too many human rights issues with mining, except if they detect a new field and they want to start mining. I don't see that they will have proper measures to talk to the people who have to move. PNG has its problems. Australia has strict laws, but also a government which is often or the old government, they often wanted to start mining and don't look at the laws. So mining is always complicated, and the problem with cobalt is that everybody knows that the biggest reserves are in Congo. And if these reserves don't enter the market anymore, the price would skyrocket. What happened some 10, 12 years ago with Tantal, when companies came under pressure with the Dodd-Frank Act, was with an Australian mine, which was closed before because they produced at a higher price than the small-scale miners in Congo. They offered to reopen their mine and to deliver to all the IT industry big guys, but for the double price. So companies decided we want to stay in Congo. And I think with cobalt, it's similar. If everybody would go to the alternatives, there's a huge price risk. And
I think, and in other countries, basically, you can audit their mines. There is no easy, but there are kind of processes. You have to map your supply chain and go there and kind of audit them. Develop an audit scheme, maybe even in cobalt that is not even around, but there are kind of more proven ways to tackle these issues. And I also think we're moving a bit away from our topic, which is the income of the people, because especially with the large-scale mines, there are very few people who get very, very rich with that, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's business, I think. But in these countries, you don't have these kind of income inequalities and social issues as you have in kind of problematic countries like DRC as an example, or some others as well.
Okay, well, let's bring it back to our topic. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes, I see some hands go up. I'm going to shoot over here. Excuse me. I'll hold the mic. You can just ask the question.
Sure.
Say your name and your association. And,
Thanks. My name is Liza Murphy. Thanks for the presentation. I work as a consultant around sustainable development questions, and I'd like to, I was glad to hear you say come back to the question. This is promoted as an impact presentation. So I think it would be really useful for us to hear about what some of the impacts are around the KENF project. Full disclosure, I used to work at Rainforest Alliance, not with you guys, but so I do know some of the work that is underway there. And then also, how will you, from an impact point of view, as you're starting on this cobalt project, how will you set your baselines? Particularly given that the German car industry may not today be seen as the most credible partner. So how will you guarantee that credibility in your reporting?
Thank you.
I think with the KENF, you've seen some of the impacts. I mentioned the kind of quality, and we also tried to measure how the income went up of the farmers, and I think income was the biggest problem there. I agree with that. Measuring progress is in DRC is a big challenge. We're thinking along. It's not finished a project. We are on the way of doing it. Depending on the site, there's a cooperative on the site which we work together with, and they at least have a kind of starting to measure accidents and things like that. So we are planning to kind of measure, like in a German industrial factory, measure accidents. Working days lost because of accidents, things like that. And since we also want to invest in kind of health station, there would be data coming from that as well. So, but I agree that there's a big problem also in, as you said, the car industry has not a very good image in many areas at the moment. So I have some worries about the project, because even if we achieve some things for the people there on the ground, it's still going to look, after the rainy season, we'll see a lot of dirty people digging holes in the ground, which doesn't look like a factory in Bavaria or something, and it won't look like one. So, so I agree with you. That we need to have a baseline and credible measurement, and also credible stakeholders kind of helping us, kind of telling us if we're doing well or not, because we actually want to achieve something for the people. We are willing to also listen to NGOs on the ground, and we're actually planning to work with an NGO which is already there on the ground working together with mining communities. What are the measures and what is their impression and opinion about what we're doing? Is it helping people there? We had some focus groups talking to people. What do you need? What is to the actual miners? What are your problems? So we're trying to engage with them, not bringing some ideas and setting it up. So, but it's difficult to prove in the end. It will be difficult. More difficult than with the Kinef project, where the income was the biggest problem, because these people earning good money, people moving from all over DRC, even from Tanzania there to mine. It's just, we should not spend money paying them more. We should spend money improving their surroundings, their conditions, their overall situation. And that makes it more difficult. It's not one single measure. Sorry, it was a bit long, but I hope it answered. Yeah.
Niels, you mentioned that issue of the sort of the image during the rainy season before, when we were talking just before, and you mentioned it just now. So, I mean, how much of an image issue is this, really? You know, what the people look like on the ground. I mean, I'm interested because we were talking about how you get this message across. So, how do you get the message across? How do you change that image?
Well, it depends on the value chain, once again. If you see the car industry and you have these fancy cars from your company, which are, from a point of view of a miner, very, very expensive, it's always a question how much of a value chain comes down to miners or to producers in factories. And so the connection between people working in these holes and being covered with mud and a lot of accidents to a 50, 60, 70,000 euro car makes it very explosive for the industry. The same happened with the IT industry a couple of years ago. Much of the blame of the conflict minerals was on them because you had a Samsung or an Apple phone and they explained that we don't know where the tantal comes from. Mm. They connected millions and millions of people and had written nice programs to identify everything, measure your pulse, your everything. But they said, no, we don't know where the raw material comes from. And there also you had the contrast between these war-ridden mining areas in northeastern Congo and fancy phones for a few $100s. So there will be a pressure on the industry, specifically if it goes now to cars which call themselves more sustainable. Much of the pressure will not come from the typical customer, specifically not in Germany. Everybody knows what an SUV means for the climate and everybody is buying it. So, but there will be a campaigning pressure. There will be a certain group of customers who want to buy something different. And this combined with legislation in some countries due to the UN guidance on businesses and human rights will also increase pressure on companies. The crucial thing is what you mentioned. You have to know your value chain. And if the value chain is too long, companies have to shorten it. And this is what you did in Bangladesh, for example.
Bangladesh, yeah. I have a kind of disagreement, or maybe it's just emphasizing different points. I went to DRC in January, and we went to a site where basically people washing stones in a lake. And somebody standing next to me said, "This is the bottom of your supply chain." And that's true, maybe. I don't know if you source from that. But if you have full transparency, the first instinct would be to take that all out of the supply chain and only to source with large-scale miners. But it won't help the people there. They are going to do something else, and we need to be very careful how we connect that, how emotional we make that. And it's unacceptable that you have children there, or that you have people kind of digging into the tailing sites and that falls in and they die on a regular basis. That is completely unacceptable. But I'm not sure if there's not an acceptable part of that, which is kind of you dig into, hopefully with safety equipment, but it's not bad if people work hard in a country like that and if they earn good money with that. And we need to be careful that they can take that money and build maybe a better future for their children with that. And if you take that all out and people can't work, then they're going to do something else. They're going to, prostitution. There are worse things than working in a mine. And it's still, and if you make a very emotional connection with the pictures you can take to our value chain, at some point all the big companies with the big brands will take that completely out. And I want to find a way of finding something in between, taking the very bad sides out, the children, the very dangerous bits, but finding a way of actually employing people there.
I didn't want to say that you should go out of small-scale mining. I just wanted to say that there's a big risk within this. It's also in other industry. I work a lot on chocolate in the last years, and working children in West Africa, and a product for children sold here makes it very critical. You have very similar labor conditions in cashew fields in Côte d'Ivoire. Have you ever heard of child labor in cashew?
No.
I haven't seen one study, and if we would make one, I'm quite sure it would be very, very similar to chocolate. But chocolate is sold by brands, and the production is very cheap, but the brands, they add up a lot of value, while cashew is a commodity. So it is easier to campaign against a company on chocolate than on cashews, even if you have the same problems. The important thing is what you said about the small-scale miners. They are, for the different metals, a few 100,000 in Congo. And during this time of an export stop after the Dodd-Frank Act, all the markets were empty in Eastern Congo. They were empty, because what happened there is you had a lot of gold mining, small-scale gold mining, and they flew out the gold to Dubai, and the traders, they went in Dubai on the markets, huge Chinese markets, and bought everything you need to sell. Pots, chairs, from plastic chairs, food, everything. And they brought this back. With Congolese money, you couldn't go to Dubai. With gold, you could go. So when a colleague of mine was doing research in Congo, and I asked him, how much do they pay for gold? And he said, I don't remember, a gram, 30 euros. And I said, well, that's more than the world market price. And he said, yeah, it is like this. Because they were competing to get the gold, where they made their money with the trade.
Okay.
Another colleague who did at the same time research in Peru had a similar experience. Traders paying more for gold than the worth of the gold. And they paid all with cash dollars. It was washing drug money. Very interesting value chains and very interesting consequences, because what happened in Eastern Congo when the Dodd-Frank Act came was that nobody was prepared for it. And we need these projects to get people prepared to have value chains which are clean of human rights abuses.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? I use the plural there very carefully, having only had one so far. Come on, there's got to be a question. Excellent stuff. My colleague, Sonia Dean.
Hi, Sonia Dean, Deutsche Welle. I'm the environment team leader. And I have a very basic question, which is, why is BMW interested in sustainability?
That's a short question, and I think it's a maybe a bit more complicated answer. First is, we get asked more by NGOs, in the press, so we need to answer these questions, and also we want to answer them truthfully, because we actually don't want to do kind of just communicating and not doing enough. And also I think kind of the image of premium is moving away from what it was in the past, and sustainability is maybe one part of that in the future, and a growing part, that people get more aware of that, and it's not acceptable to buy an expensive car and know there are abuses somewhere in the supply chain connected with that. It's the same for premium phones, but here it's the same. But also, and I want to praise our corporate culture too much, but I also think that it actually manages people I know are generally concerned if they see pictures of actually children working in a mine and know that that happens because we buy there. So I think maybe, especially in the press, people are always very cynical about motives, but sometimes also people just want to do something because it's the right thing to do, and they, especially with children or with kind of rainforests and things like that, don't want to be kind of in the business of doing that. So it's the kind of three three-part answer I've got on that. I'm not sure if that is kind of representative, but yeah.
I just one final thought from me. I mean, I just sort of think that there's often this issue. We never want to say stop, though, do we? I mean, we still want luxury cars, don't we? We still want all sorts of other things. So I wonder why, would an NGO such as Südwind not take the other approach, and perhaps you do this in depth, instead of doing studies into the company's behaviours, we do more studies into the general public's behaviours, into why to campaign in that aspect. Why are we buying these expensive cars that you say we don't need, perhaps? I mean, there's another side to the story, isn't there? You wouldn't want people to stop buying your cars either, would you?
No. Yeah.
But you don't always want to be criticised for the work you do.
Well, if you want a sustainable car sector, you need different politics on mobility. You need less cars. I have to go home to the south of Cologne from here, and there will be a huge traffic jam. It's always at that time of the day. So they are building more and more lanes since I'm living here. Usually I go by train. Today I have to go home fast, hopefully. So this is out of the reach of single companies to look for different mobility in a country. They can have ideas on it, but companies, they are often pressurized by the stakeholders, and when it's about price, it's about turnover. And a company which would say, for example, my target for the next 5 years is to reduce my car production by 1% per year and offer better mobility, they would lose at the stock exchange. They would have a huge problem, and this is part of our system we have, that you have the people in the companies who look for sustainability, like you said, and also my impression is it's more and more, they are more and more, but you have others who look what's our profit rate, what's our stock exchange value doing, and so on. And to find a way in between without the guidance of laws is often very complicated. All the reductions in fuel consumption we had in cars are, from my point of view, due to the laws by the European Union against the resistance often of the German government. And all the developments we had with the credibility of the German car industry, to put it that way, is it was, of course, much cheaper to write another software than to add some parts in your car. There was a lot of pressure within companies to do things as cheap as possible. And the protection against this is that the people within the companies who want more sustainability is that we need a backing from the lawmaker.
A final word to you. You agree? Disagree?
Well, I think your question was why do people still buy things they don't need, or objectively? I think probably 80% of the things we own we don't need in one way or the other, but some things just kind of having them or using them makes sense on other levels for people. And so, we are a car company, we want to make cars, we want to make them in a responsible way and in a good way. But to ask a car company why they're making cars, it's a difficult question.
Trust me, I ask myself, why do I do journalism every day?
Yeah.
On that note, I wish to thank you both. Niels Angel from BMW, the head of sustainability in the supply chain, and Friedel Hutz-Adams, senior researcher at Südwind Institute. Thank you very much to both of you, and thank you to all of you for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.